buildings, all this light and heat. Time to take a stand, boys, time to make a choice. Time to find our courage, time to be deployed. Make our only stand here, make our roads complete. All we waited for now, past and future meet. Get your weapons ready, kiss loved ones goodbye. Now our time is coming, and it is not the time to cry. A life you cannot buy. Face the facts before you, face the simple truth. We're hopelessly outnumbered, it's tragic but it's true. Make your last formation, take the final road. Now it's time for endings, now it's time to go. Fight the war. Oh, fight the war. Fight the war.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's right, I'm fighting the wars, what I'm talking about, because that's what I do on this show. I don't know why I don't actually fight any wars, but you know what I'm talking about. What's going on, everyone? Welcome, Arvanauts. Welcome to the stream. I hope everybody is doing well. As I'm noticing that my mic sounds awfully loud, I better make sure that Skype... Yes, thank you, Skype. Thank you, Skype, for again trying to mess up my microphone settings, but this time I was on to you, Skype. I think it's all the fault of Microsoft employees. I'm sure there's going to be some people in particular tonight who will agree with me. Anyway, it's good to see everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome, Arvanauts, to the show. I hope everyone is doing well, including my good friend and mod Apples. I hope you're not making fun of Apples. Good to see everyone tonight, and a very special stream tonight, and I'm going to talk about several things in relation to that night in just a moment, but first, a couple of reminders. As you guys know, !CTT is the best way to tweet out the stream. Lawkeeper bot is up and running now, so I think that should be good to go. I hope. !CTT will allow you to tweet out the stream or hitting that video share button underneath the window on the screen. !ARV2 will get you over to my YouTube channel where you can check out past broadcasts of the stream. !Steam Group will get you to the Arvanauts Steam Group where you can hang out with the Arvanauts in between streams. And last but certainly not least, !ArvTrayon will get you over to my Patreon, which I just noticed I hadn't put up yet because I was so anxious to make sure that I had everything else running that I forgot all about this. So how about we actually put up the Patreon? Let's see if I actually have that running there. Hold on, wait for it, wait for it. Yeah, there it is. Yay. I actually got it up there now. So yes, Patreon, which is currently sitting at $279, would be lovely if you can support it. You get some cool benefits and some cool things as we move into now. The month of June has been funded, so now we move into the month of July. And you can continue to move us forward and make voting on different games for me to play and stuff like that. So that is all stuff that is waiting for you. Now, tonight we have a very special stream, and I'm very excited about it, and it involves two people on this stream. Before I do that, I just want to thank the people who are here to start out the stream. I want to thank, of course, everyone who's here right now: Zebchi, the Mining Miner, Squeaky Fox, Smacky Butts, Serum Win-Win, Roix, Rennie Hammer, I wonder who that is, Pelmaleon, Not Diddy, Mr. Wonders, Mercurius, Love Shack, Lakota Warrior, Hillness, Gray Dybbuk, Eyes of Wolf, I wonder who that is, Blackberry Bear, Batty, Atomaniac, and of course my wonderful mods, Lego Freak, Fallen, what's up Fallen, been a little while, Dragon Spear, and of course Apples. Good to see all you guys here. I hope everyone here is doing well. And yes, so now I get to introduce these wonderful people, and it has to do with this thing that you see on the screen. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Lords of Nuroth, and it is one of the newer game books by Tin Man Games, our good friends Tin Man Games. Typically when we've had Tin Man Games on the show before, we have had two other guests. We've had Ben Cosmina and Kamina Vincent. Although we do love them, this time we have two different guests, and these are people who are intimately involved with Lords of Nuroth, and in one particular case, intimately involved with the entire shebang, because he is actually the CEO of it. And so I am very, very happy to announce and to introduce our two special guests for today, and that is Neil Rennison, the CEO of Tin Man Games, the Chief Creative Officer of Tin Man Games, etc., and Dylan Birtolo, good friend of mine, also a writer, who is the writer of the Lords of Nuroth game book. Gentlemen, it is wonderful to have you guys on. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you guys on. And chat, can we get some love for them as I take off the scroll and take off the main window and put up my face, because clearly that's what you want to see right now is my face. I'm actually going to make sure that I capture the two windows that are in question, because I can't capture my webcam because it doesn't like the fact that I'm doing that. So that's fine. There's the love. You stopped your Witcher 3 download to watch. This is serial. I know, Smacky. Listen, I am honored that you did that. I am deeply, deeply honored that you were able to do that. All right, let me get you guys your guys' picture up. So, and Neil, unfortunately, we do not have video of Neil for a variety of reasons I won't get into. But just know that Neil is a handsome gentleman. And if you saw his picture, you would be amazed and stunned. As it is, you'll just have to put up with Dylan and me. So you'll have to just assume the rest for that. So let me start with you, Neil, actually, because obviously I've been speaking with you for a long time, on and off, about Tin Man Games type of stuff. But I want to ask you I think, a little bit about what got you involved with Tin Man, and why the particular direction of the company, and how you feel about things, because you said you had a lot of updates from me, and I'm looking forward to hearing those, and I want to hear a little bit about the history of how you got involved with this first.
Yeah, no, so I've been in game development for quite a few years, and essentially I used to be a 3D artist. I used to build racetracks for racing games mostly. I used to sort of put little art teams together to go and work on these kind of games, and I made a bit of profit from doing that. I worked on a lot of sort of EA titles like Need for Speed and stuff like that, and
nice.
And I thought, hey, I love racing games, but I think I'm done here, and I'm done working for the man, and I need to become the man. And so I became the Tin Man, which was interesting.
Okay.
And so started, and it was about the time that the iPhone was released, so there was a bit of an app gold rush going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I would make it rich within no time at all, and that didn't end up being the case for me and most other people that entered that gold rush at the particular period. So it was just me and another coder, and we created some little arcade games that we released on the App Store, the very early days of the App Store, and it did terribly. And I lost like half of my money that I'd invested in the company.
Oh dear God.
Yeah, it was a bit of a wake-up call, but a good one in a way. And I just basically needed to find a better business model for myself moving forward. And so I kind of delved back into my childhood and thought, what was it that I enjoyed playing? And then there was these fighting fantasy game books, and I thought, I used to love playing them. Wouldn't they work brilliantly for the iPhone? And so I got a bunch of writers together. I disappeared into the darkest corners of the internet and found out there was a lot of sort of 35, 40-year-old guys that were writing this stuff for pleasure.
Yeah, this is where we hang out, by the way, is the darkest corners of the internet. That's clearly where Dylan hangs out, yeah.
Well, it's changed. It's funny how the landscape's changed just in the last 5 years. I mean, all there was...
We got new lights.
Sorry?
You said the landscape had changed. I just made a crack and said we got new lights.
We got new lights. Yeah, you put on the lights, that's right.
Well, all there was back then was a Yahoo group for gamebook writers, and that was it. And it was about 30 members, and that's all there was.
What year are we talking about, Neil? When this around what time?
So this would be around 2008, 2007, something like that.
Okay, the distant past of 2007 and 8. It is that way for the internet. I mean, in a way, it really does feel that way now.
Well, I mean, 2007, like the iPhone was just on the horizon. The iPad hadn't even been announced. I mean, when we released our first Gamebook Adventures title, the iPad was just a rumor.
Yeah, wow.
It just feels bizarre. So I got a load of writers and illustrators together, and we created Gamebook Adventures, which was our homage, I guess, to fighting fantasy. And it was kind of designed for fighting fantasy players that had grown up a bit. So the stories were a little bit more mature. The narrative was a little bit more dense. And then from beyond there, obviously we now make fighting fantasy apps as well. So a lot of these license holders and writers from back in the 80s, when these books were really popular, kind of came and knocked on our door, and the rest, as we say, is history, really. And yeah.
Yeah, and it's just been and has been growing since then. I actually want to ask, how much do you think? How much was Australia sort of integral to this? And the reason I ask is that I know that you were able to get some grants and things like that through Australia. I'm wondering if this story would have been possible. And actually, I might throw that question over to Dylan after that. I'm not sure whether this would be as possible in America as it is in Australia, or maybe Canada, because of the possibility of the government type grant, which our country's government has zero interest in. So I'm curious, was there a connection there that, like, Australia, gave you some support that might not have been there otherwise, or is that not the case?
No, it's crazy. So I flew out here in 2007 because I'm an Englishman. I'm a native of the UK originally. And me and my wife were going to be moving out here anyway, just because we'd always planned to. And there was a games conference here in Melbourne called Games Connect Asia Pacific. And I thought, I'm going to go along to that, because I didn't even know what city I was going to live in back then. And I fell in love with Melbourne, but also, just as importantly, this conference made me meet all the local developers, and I went to some of the talks and whatnot. And there was a talk by Film Victoria, who, if you've ever watched any Aussie film, their logo generally turns up in 90% of them at the beginning of the film.
Okay.
They do a lot of funding, and it was their foray into funding games companies. And I went to a talk, and I was just like, okay, I need to move to Victoria, so therefore I need to move to Melbourne. And the following, so that was in the November, and then the following April, me and my wife, arrived, landed in Australia and decided to move to Melbourne. And then within I'd say about 8 months of being here and starting Tin Man Games, I was making my first application to Film Victoria. We'd developed Gamebook Adventures 1 and 2 from my money, my investment, and then they helped us develop Gamebook Adventures 3 to 6. And it was basically having those 6 digital game books available to buy was kind of our platform to be able to grow, because obviously we had revenue stream there, but it was also, we developed the technology and obviously developed a name for ourselves, which is why the other license holders came knocking on our door. So I cannot, you cannot put a price on how valuable that initial money, and it wasn't a lot of money, it was a small amount, but it was enough just to get us over the line at that particular point in time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, wow.
And then since then we've had another couple of grants. So when we decided to go to Android, for example, we went back to Film Victoria and said, look, we need to get on Android devices because they're growing. And they helped out with that. And then more recently, Screen Australia, which are the other big funding body here in Australia for films and games too, gave us a bunch of cash too, because, yeah, they're awesome. So yes, super.
So they were awesome. I'm hoping also this is a backhanded way to get full sponsorship for the channel from the Australian government. So that's the secret goal, is to become an Australian channel.
Unfortunately, the government changed. They changed a couple of years ago and cancelled all the funding.
Oh, yes. Well.
So yeah.
So you've arrived at where we've been for a long time, which is the hell with the arts or anything to do with them. I see. Well, I'm glad you were able to get the support early on. It certainly felt like that was the case. All right. Well, let me turn it over then to Dylan. Let me turn it over to you. And I've known Dylan for considerably longer because Dylan and I are writers and friends through that. So I've known Dylan through the Gen Con Writers Symposium and then the Argent's Library and places like that for a while. So Dylan had a writing career for a while, and actually it was Dylan who got me in touch with Neil and with the Tin Man Games folks. So I owe Dylan, for making that connection in the first place. So thank you, first of all.
Pleasure.
And what? So tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Tin Man and with this game book, and why did you go in this direction? Because obviously you're writing novels and short stories and things like that, not the game side. So what got you interested in the game book side of things?
Well, for me, it was I actually met Neil at PAX Prime, and I went to PAX because I was working as a technical writer for Xbox over at Microsoft, and I actually got to go to PAX as part of Xbox to have an opportunity to talk to people and figure out what they needed. And it's always been a goal of mine because I've been a gamer, since I've been a console gamer since 100 days, a PC gamer since the Apple IIe days. So it's always been a dream of mine to get into game writing and narrative design. And so I went to PAX, and I deliberately went with this intention and was actually talking to a bunch of game companies for my own personal selfish reasons rather than just as an embassy of Microsoft. And I came across Neil and saw that they had game book adventures, and I picked up the iPad and looked at it and figured out what it was, and I think my first words out of my mouth were like, holy crap, this is awesome! Something along those lines. And I talked with them about it, and they told me about the platforms it was available on. We did a little bit of technical talk about what it would take to get it on Windows Phone way back when.
Okay.
And then after that, we switched cards, and I talked to them, and I just pinged them, and I was like, by the way, are you looking for any writers? And then I guess I pestered Neil enough that he finally let me submit a proposal for a storyline, and then we went back and forth a couple of times, and pretty much from there, then the Lords of Noroth became a reality.
I was just actually going to ask about the process there before we cut over, and just quickly for people who've come in, welcome in as we're gradually building up here. We have with us Dylan Birtolo, the writer of Lords of Noroth, a new game book from Tin Man Games. That's the person you see on screen. Not pictured, but still audible, is Neil Rennison, who is the CEO of Tin Man Games, and as you can see, he's also on chat as Rennehammer and has been here before. So I am very privileged to have both of them on. So Dylan, I guess what I would ask then is the process a little bit for you guys. Obviously very different from the process of writing a novel, which you complete, send a draft off to an editor, editor gives feedback, you respond to the editor, and so on. And yes, there may be beta readers and things like that, but it's usually not as piecemeal, whereas it seems to me that this is by definition more, I don't know, non-linear or more sort of modular, in the way that you're writing it. So I'm curious if you could tell me what was the difference for you in the process of writing it, if there was a difference, and how did the process work?
Well, if you abstract it far enough, there really wasn't much difference because we went through, as you usually do with a novel-length work where you're contracted for it as opposed to where you're creating it ahead of time.
Yeah.
We went back and forth on the storyline, on the outline, and then once it was approved, Neil gave me the format and gave me some samples about how to write it, and then I pretty much wrote the entire manuscript in one go, and then from there the editing process takes off and things like that. But from the writing perspective, it was very different to write in a way that the story changes and there's different paths. So basically having a branching storyline. When I spoke with Neil and he was describing it to me the first time, and so I'm totally going to paraphrase this from him and steal it from him. But he said to kind of picture nodes of the story that are going to happen. No matter how you go through it, there are these certain big events that will happen.
Right.
Your situation as the character might be very different going into these events, and what the end result of these events based upon that situation can be different, but you're going to have these like 4 or 5 core events, and then you have all these branching paths on how to get there. And one of the most amazing things for me about this was, and I still have it over there in my shelves, I had to create a very large map of all of the branching pathways and showing all of the paths they took, and then where they connected and went out, and then which ones were dead ends where the story ends, and then I had to connect all of those to story segments that I wrote. And so that part was completely new to me and I enjoyed doing it. It was really exciting.
Wow, that's cool. And so Neil, presumably, what is it exactly that drew you to Dylan's work other than his "holy crap, this is cool"? I presume there was something else that drew you to Dylan that got you to say, "This is a guy that I want to write a book for me."
Yeah, well, Dylan sent over some. I mean, this is quite a long time ago now. Dylan, which PAX was it? Is it 2012, 2011? Can't remember.
Let's see. It's 2015 now, so yeah, it would have been 2011.
Yeah. So my memory may be a bit hazy, but I would have asked Dylan to send over some examples of his writing beforehand, which I'd have read, and it was obviously, I was obviously really, really impressed and really keen to have him on board. And just I remember Dylan at PAX. It was one of those meetings where it stuck with me that this would be a great person that we'd want to write one of our adventures. And we were at a point in the time of the company where I was so hungry to work with talented, especially fantasy writers, who just could understand the vision of an interactive narrative story, because it wasn't wonderfully fashionable. It's funny, game books even in the last few years have become fashionable again, but even just a few years ago it wasn't very fashionable. So and just the enthusiasm Dylan showed when we were chatting, and it's so important for a little company like ours, Australian company, to get out to the places like the USA and meet different kind of levels of cultural, it's the role-playing game culture and the fantasy writing culture in the States is a lot different to it is here. So
and Dylan is Pacific Northwest. I mean, when he represents, it's kind of the avatar, you might even say, of role-playing culture in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, so it was an obvious fit straight away, and we were really, really excited. So yeah, and it worked really well. So
were there, now in a situation, and then we are going to move over to the actual gameplay part, when there were disagreements between the two of you, now that we're removed from the moment, you can probably speak very honestly about them. If there were disagreements, obviously what Neil ultimately said had to go, but I'm wondering how you guys negotiated them, if there were them. I mean, were there moments where Dylan was like, I'd really like the story to, or at least the character develop in this way, and Neil was like, no, you fool. You know, I don't care if you represent all the Pacific Northwest. I will tell you. I mean, no. I mean, how did it work in terms of sort of navigating disagreements, if there were any, in terms of how things should proceed? Or maybe you guys were just kumbaya the whole time. But I'm curious.
Well,
about
I just threatened to show up in my armor with the sword and the shield, and that kind of settled.
Yeah, Dylan does actual combat, jousting, and the whole 9 yards. That's he's not making that up. But how did you guys navigate that?
So
yeah, go ahead, Dylan.
Okay, I was going to say, realistically, we didn't run into that except for like the first storyline that I submitted, the first proposal that I submitted. I sent it off to Neil, and he read it over, and he got back to me, and he said, you know, I like the storyline that you have. I like the arc. I like how it's laid out, but it's too similar to other things that we have done. And in that case, it was just, I don't know, I took the approach of, okay, that makes perfect sense, so I'll come up with something completely different. And so I just junked that and came up with something completely different. And then from that point forward, you know, I had to make some minor tweaks based on suggestions, but those were suggestions based on the world. And I've always taken the approach of, when I'm working in someone else's IP, when I'm working with an editor or whoever, they're going to know their IP much better than I am. So I just went along with that. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Because I was never asked to do any changes that I felt uncomfortable with. Like, the story was the same.
Okay. So Neil, from your sort of side of things, how many initial changes did Dylan have to make, or how did you sort of, I don't know, navigate? I'm using the term navigate too much, but how did you arrange it when you sort of had to give him a suggestion? Because I've been in that situation before as a writer where I submit something and the person's like, this is great, but since this part has been done, please take a hard left and go in another direction or something like that. And that's not always easy. So I'm wondering how you sort of approach that with Dylan.
Oh, look, ultimately the important thing for me is just that it's an engaging story, and it's doing all the right things in terms of, you know, giving enough variation to choice and going off in enough interesting directions. And I, from my memory, I don't remember there being many issues with that at all. And I think Dylan's right. The only things that I seem to remember were just kind of more world aesthetic things, just to fit it in. When I seem to remember when the story was suggested, and I said, oh, it would be really great to place it in this town. We haven't had a game book placed here before, and it really works well in context of some of the other events that have recently happened. And then, you know, what happens, you know, once Dylan had finished writing and sent the final thing to us, quite a lot of time passed, but I'm sure we'll go into that a bit more detail later because there's a reason for that. But what we tend to do is we tend to realign the story with the world. So there's a bit of a world history, and you know, it's set in certain events. And what I like to do is I like to have a continuity with the world, so that if somebody's reading our titles and they've learned about a character.
Hey
or
Neil,
an event,
let me pause you for a second.
No.
They're saying on chat that the stream went down. I don't know why, because it doesn't look like it did on my end.
Okay.
But let me...
Oh, it says offline on mine.
Yeah, it says offline here.